Stacey. So Thompson, everyone, welcome, welcome. We're glad you are here to Innovate BC webinar. Really looking forward to our guest presenter, Wendy. She's gonna bring her knowledge to the table today. So we welcome you all. You know, the sun is shining here in Amiskwaci, Weskaigan. That's Edmonton Treaty 6 territory. So I hope wherever you are joining from this afternoon, that the sun is shining, that you're surrounded by creators, goodness, and beauty. So I'm gonna pass it over this virtual mic to Stacey, and she's gonna just do a little introduction about BC Innovate.
Hey, apologies in advance. I'm having technical issues with my video at the moment. Hopefully that would be resolved soon rather than later. But yeah, I'm Stacey Armstrong. I'm part of the Marcom team at Innovate BC. We're super proud to support and help fund these can-do webinars. I'm looking forward to see what the series builds out to. Just to give you a little bit of background on Innovate BC, we're a Crown agency that represents the government of BC and our province's innovation ecosystem. We make accessing government programs and support as simple as possible for companies, both large and small. It's okay if you don't need to. I can just talk through it if you want. But as part of our mandate, we build, create, and facilitate strong relationships across the BC tech sector and small, medium, and businesses to reach global markets and attract new interest and investment in BC tech. To foster the growth of innovation and commercialization, we advise the government on policies and programs that will support the global success of BC tech and small businesses. Ultimately, we want to see the impact of the BC tech sector succeed across the entire province to stimulate the local economy, job creation, and global recognition. So just to briefly go through a few of our funding initiatives, we do offer student hiring grants. There's two in particular. So if you want to hire a co-op student or someone that's recently graduated, we do have two programs that can help facilitate that. We also have the Ignite program, and this awards up to $300,000 to research projects that are working with academia that face an industry problem, usually in the areas of natural resources or clean tech, but that solution will need to commercialize within a 3-year time frame for that funding. We also do sponsorships and partnerships, such as the one that we're doing today with Can-Do. But that just allows us to achieve mandates through relationships and exposure to diverse groups. And the final one is our Venture Acceleration Program. We have an expansive network through BC. It's not just Vancouver based, which is kind of unique for BC. We have 11 accelerators throughout the province. And basically, it's a pay structure venture growth program designed to guide, coach, and grow ambitious early stage technology entrepreneurs to help them succeed. So it's more of like a coaching process. But there's two on the island. There's one on the Sunshine Coast. We have multiple in the Lower Mainland. We have the Okanagan, West Kootenays, Central Interior, which includes Kamloops, but that's a broad area. And same with Prince George, which is also a huge area that they support. That was quick and tried to make it in my 3 to 5 minute timeline. But if you do have any questions on the programs or how Innovate BC can help your tech company or small business, please reach out to me, whether it's sarmstrong@innovatebc.ca or marketing@innovatebc.ca. We'd be very happy to help or guide you in the right direction.
Awesome. Thank you, Stacy. So that's Stacy from Innovate BC. Maybe Stacy, if you could put your contact information in the chat box, that would be helpful.
Yeah, totally.
Thank you for sharing what some of the programs and the support that you can offer. That's a really helpful knowledge. So thank you very much for sharing. And so Innovate BC has been part of Wednesday webinars with Can Do. They've been in partnership. They've been sponsoring these amazing webinars. So really, really thankful for the work that they do. All right, so quickly, I'm going to do an introduction to our guest speaker, Wendy. She's joining us from BC. I hear the weather's nice out there as well. So today's conversation is demystifying your budgets, planning for your future $1 at a time. So this webinar is an introduction to budgeting for non-financial managers. She will discuss why budgets are needed, how to prepare them, how to monitor them throughout the year, also providing some tips and tricks when it comes to time to prepare your budgets. You will learn how and what to do in the let me just rephrase this. You will learn how what you do in the present can affect your future. So today's guest speaker is Wendy Ham. She is the Executive Director of AFOA. So some of you might be wondering, what does that mean? Thank you for asking, because I asked Wendy that myself. So Aboriginal Finance Officers Association of BC. She is a chartered professional accountant. She actually was newly elected to be chair of the board of directors. She's also a certified Aboriginal Finance Manager. She holds a certificate in First Nation tax administration through the TULO Center of Indigenous Economics and Thompson River University. Prior to her role at AFOA BC, Wendy was the finance manager and tax administrator for Sumas First Nation for 7 years. She's been a member of AFOA BC since 2014. So she has experience in finance and administration. She has worked in post-secondary education and non-for-profit sectors. She is a firm believer in lifelong learning. So am I, and probably all those who are here joining on this virtual webinar are as well. She is happy to bring her experience, knowledge, and curiosity to her current role and is honored to work with all the First Nations in BC. So Wendy, we are so honored that you carved out some time to bring your knowledge to us this afternoon. Really important conversation. So thank you for joining us, and everyone who is here, who have joined in this virtual community. We welcome you. We thank you for being here. I'm going to pass that virtual mic over to Wendy.
Well, thank you, Michelle, and Stacy, thanks for being here today. It's great to hear more about Innovate BC. I think the first thing that I want to do is acknowledge that I'm coming to you from the unceded territory of the Coast Salish people, and particularly the Coquitlam people. I'm here in the lower mainland of BC. Yes, it's beautiful and sunny here as well, and enjoying the day. So with that, I'm going to share my screen, and I also want to thank Can Do for inviting me here today to talk to you a little bit about, let me move this over. Can you see my screen? Good, okay. I wanted to talk to you a little bit about budgets. I know it's not the funnest subject, you know, that whole finance subject sometimes can be a little bit daunting to some of you, especially if you're not a financial manager, and you have to, you are tasked with having to create your budgets for your departments or such, and so it can be a little bit of a daunting task. So hopefully within this hour today, I can just give you a little bit of knowledge and such, and we can go from there. But feel free to raise your hand if you like, and you want to ask a question, or you can put it in the chat box, and hopefully Michelle or Elsie or someone can wave me down when there's a question that comes up. But so let me just start by just talking a little bit about AFOA. So who is AFOA BC? So we were founded in 1996, so that's almost 25 years ago, as a nonprofit organization to help professional development and networking of Indigenous financial managers. Our mandate is now inclusive of nation administrators, managers, elected officials, economic development corporations, and community members. We host a variety of workshops and conferences on financial literacy and capacity development and the like. So we are membership-based, and we have a national body, AFOA Canada, which does the certifications. We have a number of certifications in financial management, in public administration, and in Indigenous leadership, as well as HR management. So if you are interested in those certificates, please go to the AFOA Canada website, which is afoa.ca, I believe, and look up that. So, but yeah, so we are always looking at innovative and fun ways to be able to bring knowledge to First Nations and those working in band administration. So let's just talk about budgets today. So maybe we'll start with why. Why do we budget, right? Why do we even need a budget? Well, I mean, as we all know, there's finite resources, not only, dollars to spend. And so we need to look at strategic plans and comprehensive community plans and use those as, ways to determine where the best use of the dollars that we have can go to, and what programs and services and such. Now, there are requirements under law for budgets. Your land code requires that you probably have to have a budget for land dollars. If you have a financial administration law, or a FAL, that we like to call it for short, we're into acronyms, right? And that will require not only an annual budget, but a 5-year budget, right? Audit standards, you'll note that whenever an audit is done, they usually like to have a budget to compare it to, right? And your funding entities will want to know how you're spending your money. So those are kind of some of the reasons why you might want to, why you need a budget. And also your communities want to know, they depend on basic services. So they want to be sure that you're budgeting enough dollars to be able to provide those services. So don't forget about your community members in this whole process. They're probably the most important group of people to what's the word I'm looking? Oh gosh, it just escapes me now. But to be responsible to, right? And so also with if any of you are doing or under a 10-year grant scenario, that also is a requirement for a budget, and actually a 5-year budget. So which can be a little bit difficult, but it's kind of nice under the 10-year grant because you can set your own priorities, and you can now look at allocating those finite dollars to areas which are most important to your community. The other reason that we need a budget is for accountability. how do you hold the managers accountable for what they're doing and their projects and services, but they need to be accountable to their budgets, right? Budget, you can think of a budget as a contract, right? It's kind of a contract between the manager in control of the activity and council. Council has to sign off on your budgets or your board, if you're an economic development corporation for that matter. But that's kind of, you're saying this is how I'm going to spend the money, and they're going to say, well, then we're going to hold you to that. If we're going to approve that, that's how you need to be spending it. So it should be clear that I can do this with what is being provided, right? And so it helps to be able to say, yeah, I think I can do this with the money that I have. And it doesn't set you up for, it sets you up for success. It tries to set you up for success, right? And from budgets, work plans need to be in place, and they define what is being agreed to. Again, more like a contract. It's defining what you are going to do and how much it's going to cost, right? And then also, with your budgets, you need your work and your work plans. You need to use a metric to determine whether you're successful or not. And that's really important. That's something that I think we all spend a lot of time looking for budgets and looking at budgeting. But what we forget is, how do we measure the success of those programs and services with the money we have? And so, we do a whole presentation actually on SMART goals, which are, that you make them measurable and that sort of thing. So it's a way for you to be able to establish what success looks like to you each year. Oh, what happened there? Okay, so let's go to the next one. Okay, so now, so how do we get to a budget? How do we know? Well, it's all of these plans, right? There's planning and that we always have to look at starting someplace. So really, the place that it starts is with a comprehensive community plan. And when you have a comprehensive community plan, that's a plan that your community has said, this is what is important to us, right? And then from there, then you develop a strategic plan. And chief and council will take the comprehensive community plan, and they'll start to develop the strategies, which is a little bit deeper dive than the comprehensive community plan, into a strategic plan. That strategic plan then kind of sets the scene for everybody working in the First Nations government to kind of understand what chief and council sees as priorities for the community as well, and with a little bit more detailed. From that strategic plan, the business plans are created, right? And so the business plan is something that the band administrator or band manager would be very much involved in trying to further detail what is in the strategic plan and how we're going to achieve those priorities that have been identified. And then it goes down further within each department, and each department creates their own work plans to support the business plan, which supports the strategic plan, which ultimately supports the comprehensive community plan. There's a straight line connection between all of those things. And from your work plan, you develop your budgets. So the really important question to ask yourself as perhaps a manager within a department, if you're a lands manager or an economic development officer, or within a department in a First Nations community, do you know what those priorities are and how your department fits into those? And so that's really the first question to ask yourself, right? How do you know what those priorities are? Have you looked at the strategic plan? Have you been exposed to the business plan? That's how kind of the starting point for budgeting works, right? So the budget is really a vehicle. It's a vehicle to help you get where you want to go, right? But of course, again, you need to know where that is, right? So that's kind of a broader overview of what you need to, where you need to start. So from why and such, we're going to go to how, right? So generally, I've always talked, there's kind of two separate budgets that we look at, right? There's a capital budget. And do we know what that means? What does capital mean? I know capital is usually is a accounting word. And generally the definition of that is capital is anything that you purchase that has a life that is longer than 1 year. So it's physical equipment, buildings, infrastructure, even desks and chairs and computer equipment would all be considered capital equipment because generally they will last you for a number of years. And in the accounting world, those of us accountants, what we like to do is we like to match up how your dollars are spent to how long you can use that item. So essentially, even though you pay out $10,000 for a piece of equipment in 1 year, we like to kind of divvy it out over equally amongst the length of the life of that piece of equipment. So that because it gives you benefit over all that time. So that's what we kind of refer to as capital when we're talking about budgets. The other one that we'll talk about in a few minutes is operating budgets, right? And they are also tied to your capital budget. Generally, the way that I prefer to say, to tell managers is start with a wish list. Like just put everything that you would like to see on that list. It's just a starting point. And at least when you start by starting with that wish list, then you start to pare down, or you start to kind of go, okay, well, we'll do this in year 1. We might buy this other piece in year 3 because we don't need it right away. Or it's a great way for you to kind of be able to look at a big list and then prioritize, right? And then just remember that capital, purchases actually drive operating expenditures. So, and sometimes maybe even revenue as well. So as an example, if you're a lands manager, you might need a truck to drive around, that you need for work, right? And so a new truck would be considered a capital purchase. And so when you buy that new truck, yes, you will, you have that, but then you've also got to consider you have yearly maintenance on it. You have snow tires maybe that you have to purchase, so you, and the newer the truck, the less maintenance that you would need on it as well. So that's going to drive some of your repairs and maintenance kind of expenditures, right? In the first year, it might be quite low because all you'd have to do is an oil change and such. But, in year 3, you might need to have a new set of brakes put in, right? So you've got to think about those sorts of things when you're buying capital, and that's how capital can drive those operating expenditures. Also, you might have a new member training facility, right? So now if you build a new building, you have to think about operation costs for that building, and those would be considered operational expenditures for your operations budget. So that's how your capital kind of drives some of your operations. So, and they might even have program costs, or can you derive some revenue for that? So it's a great place to start when you're budgeting. So from your capital budget, that follows is your operational budget. Now you should, or I know if you have a FAL or financial administration law, or you're in 10-year grant, you will need to do a 5-year operating budget. It's not as hard as it sounds, trust me, but I will get to that in a little bit. But I mean, you go, how the heck do I know what's going to happen 5 years from now? And you don't. The answer is you don't, and nobody does. And budgets are meant to be adjusted when things happen. So please never feel like it's a hard and fast you are making a prediction based on what you know today, which can change, and it usually does. So the first year is always the hardest, but once you've got that, then you can always add an inflation escalator to it or something like that, so that makes it a little bit easier. But you know that the further you go out, the less accurate it's going to be, right? And so this is the one thing that I would say is always talk to your CFO or to your finance manager. They are the ones who should be able to help you determine things such as what kind of inflation rate you should use if you're going to do a five-year operating budget, right? They should be able to provide you with detailed wage information, because when you're talking about wages, it's not simply, well, this person makes X dollars an hour. You have to add in if they get benefits. Then there's costs like mandatory costs to CRA, and like if you do EI and that sort of thing is required, right? And so it's always vacation pay, right? If you have to pay vacation pay, right? So you have to include those in your detailed wage information. And if there are, like usually with Indigenous Services funding, you usually get an admin fee that you can use to help overcome some of your administration costs. And so the finance department should be able to come up with that, or if your portion of insurance numbers and such. So use your finance department. That's what they're there for, right? So a couple of things to keep in mind when you're building budgets. You need to keep notes on how you came up with the numbers. It helps you remember how you arrived at those totals. So make sure that you keep those. And if you don't know Excel is a great software to use to help with that. And hopefully your finance department has given you some sort of template within Excel to be able to help you with that. You have to consider fixed and variable costs. What's the difference between fixed and variable costs? So fixed costs are costs that remain the same year over year, and they're fixed costs. So for example, if you have a photocopier, that photocopier lease might be a 5-year lease, and it's the same amount year over year over year. That would be a fixed cost. Or if you rent office space, right? That rent would be the same year over year over year. It doesn't change until you have to renew your lease or such. Variable costs are costs that change based on how much you use of it. So for example, heating could be a variable cost, because if it's really cold winter, you might have a higher heating cost, and that could be variable, right? Or if you have more employees, right, that might have a variable context to it. So you have to make sure that you understand, and again, your finance department should be able to help you with this, understand which are variable and which ones are fixed. And you look for economies of scale with other departments. So some of the things that we always, that I always kind of would give a number to the departments is things like office supplies and those sorts of things, because you buy them on a whole, and then each department uses some of them. And so it makes it easier to buy in bulk, paper, for example, than to each individual department buying unto themselves. So that's what we talk about when we talk about economies of scale. And then, and really, you guys are the experts in your department. So you should really understand what you need. And so that's why you're the one tasked with doing that, because you know how the programs run, you know how the services are, and what you have to consider. So you're really the expert, and that's why you're tasked with this. So, but always, always, always look to your finance department for help. So, okay, so what do you need to get started? Well, you need direction. right? You need direction on services to be provided, quantity and quality. So you need to know what are the priorities of the community. What do they want to see? What kind of products or services do they want to see? Whether you're in health, like if you're in the health department, right? You may need to have a doctor once a week come into the community, right? And that kind of thing. So you need to understand what services are needed to be provided, how much, quality and quantity, right? So those are things those are questions that you need to have, that you need to ask prior to, getting down to the nitty gritty and trying to develop a budget. So if the program or department already exists, you might want to get past data. Finance always should have years of data on that department and how much it costs to run those programs. So service level data and financial data. So not only if, if you need service level data. So again, I'll use that, you want a doctor to come in once a week. Well, 5 years ago, you may not have had that many people living on reserve as you do today. So you may need them more often, right? Depending on, or even look at a childcare, like if you need more childcare spaces because you've got more kids in the community, right? So those are the kinds of things when we talk about service level data and financial data. You have to have an understanding of any major changes in activity or environment compared to previous years. What's changed? Understand what's changed and how that change might have impact on you and your department. So it's always good to look back. And if you are new to the position, you might, you need to talk to people, find out what's changed, right? And you need to have an idea of what your allocation will be. And that has to come from either the band administrator or the finance department. But, and in some cases, especially with Indigenous Services, they're they tell you, if you're under a contribution agreement, they'll tell you, well, this is how much you have in your pot. But now if you're under 10-year grant, that's kind of like, okay, well, that's up to the band. So you're going to have to work with your band administrator to find out what your allocation is going to be. So come on. Okay. So you'll need to have an understanding of how services this year will compare to the previous year. You'll need support from finance in providing numbers regarding wages, admin fees, inflation adjustment assumptions, etc. So again, use your finance department to give you that information. Don't try and put it all together yourselves. That's part of the software that they enter all of those invoices into, give you so much data that you should be able to use that, right? And then, once you've created a budget, you talk to them and say, does this seem realistic? Like, is there anything that I'm missing? So, and what do you need? You need time. It takes time to do this. It's not something that you can just say, oh, I'm going to pick this up and I'm going to have it done by the end of the week. It never works that way. You need some time to just to start, and it's never too early, right? And again, this caveat, as you budget, right, year to year, it becomes easier. So just remember that. So let's just talk about a few budget models, right? There's different kinds, and depending if you go from one community to another, and they may use different ones. So it's probably a good idea to have a general understanding of the different types of budget models that you can use, right? So we're talking specifically operating budgets at this point, and most of what we're talking about today is operating budgets. So there's kind of two basic types of operating budget models: incremental budgeting and zero-based budgeting. I think they're pretty self-explanatory, but incremental is what you do especially when you're planning out the 5-year budget. You will take what your current or this year's actual figures are, and then you will you'll add an escalator or an inflation rate onto that. It might be 1.5% or 2% or something like that to those numbers, and use those numbers as your increment for next year. And then for the following year, you would add another 1%, 2%, something like that as an inflation, right? So, and then you have to think about any change in plans. So if you're going to change some programs or make changes or do something differently, you have to think about that. And it may be a little of both, zero-based and incremental. So for example, in incremental budgeting for revenue, sales in a retail outlet would be one of those that you would probably use incremental budgeting for. If you did $100,000 in sales, say it's cigarette sales, right? $100,000 in cigarette sales last year, you may, or in this current year, you may go, well, we're going to do a little bit more marketing. We're going to do a little bit more. I think we could probably do 100, we can like make a 10% increase in revenue, right? So you might then go, okay, well then I'll budget for 110,000 in revenue, and knowing what that is makes it easy for you to determine what that cost is going to be, right? The cost of your cigarettes will increase as well, right? But by 10%. So, utility fees or rent may be something that you can look at as if you charge for utility fees. You might want to look at what an incremental increase in utility fees, if you provide them in water, for example, might cost, right? Or might take in. So those are the kinds of things that you might use incremental budgeting for. And expenses like office supplies, repairs and maintenance. And COLA in this slide stands for cost of living adjustment. So we, of course, use another acronym and call it COLA, but wages, right? We always look to add a cost of living adjustment to your wages so that you keep up with the cost of living, the increases in cost of living for the general population, right? But those kinds of expenses, you could add just an incremental increase to help you budget for it. Zero-based budgeting is kind of starting from scratch, right? Every year. So saying, okay, well, I have, how much is it going to cost? And this is where you use historical data to be able to help you determine future data if there is one. So examples would include new employees. If you're hiring somebody, you're going to use zero-based budgeting because you have nothing to compare it to, but you would probably go out, or probably if you have an HR department, get them to kind of let you know how much that position would go for in the market, right? And see, and how much you have to spend for it. So new employees would be something that would start with a zero-based budget. Utilities, automotive fuel, right, is something you don't know what the fuel rate's going to be. And so there's specialty projects or items, and new projects are always going to be used zero-based because you've never done them before. So there's not really history. And it just takes, it's not that it's more difficult. It's just, it takes some time to just kind of think of all of the things you need to think about. So in general, in First Nations, we look to run a balanced budget. I mean, economic development corporations aside, which may have a profit component to it, for a First Nations government, you generally want a balanced budget. And what does a balanced budget actually mean? You hear that on the radio all the time. A balanced budget is actually that the money you take in equals what you spend, right? So that's what a balanced budget is. It's essentially, you want to balance how your money coming in with the money going out, and you end up at zero at the end of the day. So that is generally your goal. And that does that happen every year? No, of course not, because things change, right? yeah, it rarely happens. And sometimes you are in a position of a surplus from a previous year. And I know funding envelopes like IFC, I mean, they do understand that. And so most of the time you do have a fixed contribution agreement, if you're still under the contribution agreement, in that you can use the surplus from the previous year in the following year. So, you know, if you do have a surplus and something happens, so you will deliberately put yourself in a deficit because you have that surplus from the previous year that you're going to use, right? And perhaps you might have a special project that you know, partway through the year, you're thinking, oh, I really want to do this project. You may want to save some of those funds to be able to use them in the following year. So it's kind of always kind of a changing atmosphere, but make sure that you check your funding agreements as to whether you can defer funds between fiscal years. That's really important. If there's one thing you're going to take away from this, just make sure that you know if you can defer funding. So, so the last tips, like that I mentioned before, is keep notes on how you came up with each number. So when I was working at Sumas First Nation, I would have kind of an Excel template in which the first page was the totals for each kind of line item. And then in behind it, I would have pages where you could put all your calculations, right? So you may list out your employees and how much, right, they get paid, right? And or you know, post-secondary was another example, or XDev. Let's talk about XDev, right? Like you might have a training program that you're doing to train members, and so you could list out the names of the members and how much that was, you know, each of them were it was going to cost for each of them to get that training, right? So it's the more detail that you can keep in your, you know, keep together, the better off you are. So, and it's also helpful for you to keep those so that you can add to it year after year and make sure that you know how you got those numbers to begin with and how you can adjust them, right? And it really helps that if you are presenting your budget to council or to your band manager, that you know how you came up with those numbers, and you know that you're confident to say, yes, this is what I thought of, this is why I hit this, and this. And with that confidence, it's more likely that they're going to go, oh, they know what they're doing. They know their programs, right? And so it's really important that you keep that together. So that I know I went through this rather quickly, and I know I wanted to leave some time for people who had questions. I also wanted to let you know that we're going to be going around the province of BC and doing two-day in-person budgeting workshops. And these are way more in-depth. And what we do is we actually ask you to bring your budgets with you, and we help you create them. And so these are two-day budgeting workshops that will help you, you know, have a functioning budget at the end of your 2 days. And so if you're at all interested in joining those, and they are in person, yay, finally. They're starting in the fall. In October, we're going to be in Prince George. We're going to be in Cranbrook, and we're going to be in the Okanagan, and then we will be doing the island in the Lower Mainland in the winter in January and February of next year, or January and March of next year. And we can get into much more depth and a little bit more detail on all of these concepts that I've talked about today. But I did want to leave some time if anybody has questions. Put up your hand or turn on your video, or put your question in the chat, and I'd be happy to answer any questions that you have. And thank you. Let me go And that's my contact information as well. So if you do want, and we also do in community workshops as well. So if you want, you know, to have us come into your community and deal with, you know, with all of your managers to talk about how to budget, we can do that too, right? So lots of opportunities, and this is how you get in touch with me. And please let me know if you have any questions.
Thank you, Wendy. In the chat box, Yvonne is asking, do you know where on the island? So
I don't know yet. We haven't booked it yet. We'll probably try and keep it central, but yeah, where are you, Yvonne? Where would you like us to be?
I'm on the north end of the island in Port Hardy.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So, you know, I mean, my first inclination is to try and stay somewhere central, you know, whether it be Campbell River or perhaps, you know, Nanaimo or something. But yeah, I mean, we haven't booked anything yet. We were just waiting to kind of see where everybody who wanted it would like to come to.
Really
where would you like us to come to?
I'd really like to join because I'm just starting off with doing budget. So any type of support would be helpful.
Yeah, you know, it really is. And this is a great workshop. We've always had really a lot of success with it because it's nice to be able to come out of the end of a workshop and actually have something that you can use. So yeah, for sure.
Because some of what you're saying now, I'm familiar with now, but like when I first started, I didn't even know where to go or how to find information. A lot of the lingo that the finance department used, and say my supervisor, I was like way out in left field. And I'm like, okay, I'm sorry, but whatever you guys are saying is going over my head because I don't have that experience. So I work in a daycare center. I've been on the floor for 28 years and I just started doing a manager position like just over a year ago. So I'm eager to learn and to be able to follow through with doing my reports and whatnot, but I'm just needing that extra support on getting, I guess, in the right direction and getting the support.
Yeah, absolutely. And I totally get it. I mean, sometimes us finance people tend to kind of talk about things that are, you know, we forget that not everybody uses our lingo, right?
Yeah.
And so we have to remember to take a step back and talk in a little bit more easy to understand ways, for sure. Yeah. Absolutely. But you know what? Please take my email me, and then I will make sure that I have Candace was on here. She's gone now, but Candace is our program coordinator, and she'd be happy to make sure to let you know when we're going to be on the island and where. Oh, there she is. That's Candace. Say hi, Candace. She's our program coordinator.
Okay.
And so yeah, just send us a note and we will be sure to let you know.
Okay, that sounds good. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks for joining today.
Yeah, thank you for all your info is helpful.
Good. I hope so. It's hard to do all of it, you know. I mean, there's a lot of information. I mean, budgeting is not something that you can really drill down on in an hour, but we're certainly happy to be able to provide some knowledge and give you, if you take one tidbit home, right? That's always the best thing in this.
Yeah, for sure.
Awesome.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks, Yvonne. Thanks for joining us, Yvonne. Well, thank you, Wendy, for your presentation. You know, budgeting is crucial. It's so important for the health of our organizations, our First Nation communities. You know, and as sometimes it's tedious as it feels, it's so important. I feel like you just began some of what you have to offer. Like this was just the beginning of your knowledge.
Yeah, and you know, the one thing that I always say is one thing I can be sure that will happen is that it'll change. And budgeting, though you create one at the beginning of a year, you should be constantly working on adjustments to it. There's always going to be adjustments because you don't know everything at the beginning of the year, and partway through the year things change. And when things change, that's going to mean your budget's going to change. And so you should be looking at kind of massaging that and taking that into consideration. And that's not a bad thing. Like, it's not, if you're not going to hit the budget that you had at the beginning of the year, I'm going to tell you right now, you're not, because it always changes, because circumstances change. Look what happened in March of last year, right? COVID hit. And now we're like, right? Who would have even thought that that could be something that we would have to be dealing with? And it can, those are the types of things that can really put a wrench into that sort of thing. So you do the best you can with the information you have at the time. And when you find out that that information may be inaccurate or changed, then you go back and you go, okay, well, what's that going to do? And all it is a learning experience, right? And then it helps make it easier for the next time a change comes. So don't be afraid, don't worry that it's not going to remain the same, right?
Great. Okay. Does anyone have any other questions or comments for our guest speaker, Wendy?
I just wanted to ask, sorry,
Yeah.
if there's any info, like in regards, like say the capital funding or the operational funding, because when I first started out, and right now it's just like, okay, I have a bit of an idea of what that is, but like I'm a person that needs to see it and hear it and just look at it at the same time.
So you're talking about
in the information, like
you're talking about
reading
funding
material, or yeah, just like more info on the operational funding. Okay, this is what this looks like, and then the capital funding. Like, I don't have the full grasp on that, but I want to understand it better. So when someone speaks of it, I'm like, okay, I get what they're talking about now.
So, if you're talking about funding, like Indigenous Services type of funding, if you go to their website, under Indigenous Services, it does talk, and you can drill down and get some information on how they calculate some funding.
Yeah.
Some of it you really have to go to your finance department or to your band administrator and ask them, because they're the ones who are going to know.
Yeah.
Because at the beginning of each year, if you were under even under a 10-year grant, they get a document that kind of explains how that funding, what it's made up of, but they also have the ability to adjust it. So they're going to be the ones who will be able to tell you how much your department is going to be working with. So do work with your finance team and your band administrator. They'll be able to help you, but you can also go online and look on Indigenous Services website. They'll be able to give you some understanding of it, of how they calculate some of that stuff.
All right. Thank you.
Okay. Good.
Awesome. Okay. Well, thank you so much. I see you're going to go on tour,
We're gonna go.
all.
Yeah, it won't be necessarily me, but we do have some great facilitators. Yeah.
So, if you're interested in this, if you live in the BC area, definitely check out those workshops that will be offered by the AFOA. So that's the Aboriginal Finance Officers Association of British Columbia. I feel like this is just such a great resource to tap into. I feel like, budgeting always needs to be refreshed. We need to take those lessons in yearly, annually, because it's really, really important.
Yes.
So thank you so much, everyone, for joining us this afternoon. Thank you so much, Wendy, for just sharing what you know.
Thank you.
And they're also, so Candace had put the website on there as well that you could check it out. So a really good resource. So thank you for joining us. We're so grateful that you're here. We're so grateful for this virtual community, sponsored by Innovate BC, that we have this opportunity to learn, to refresh the knowledge that we already have. Just so we can become stronger in our organizations, in our nations. Knowledge is power. So
Yes.
thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. I hope
Thank you.
wherever you are that you would be at peace, that you would feel healthy and well, and that you would walk with ease for the rest of the day. So have a good day. Be grateful for the gifts that the Creator has given to us. They're all around. Sometimes we just gotta look for them. So have a good rest of the day, and thank you for joining us.
Thank
Peace.
you, Michelle.